story of Upbuild began in a monastery. On our quest to understand ourselves more deeply, we recognized it is our attachment to our egos, our identities, that gets in the way of being our true selves. This podcast will help you understand your ego. It will help you better understand your inner world, the motivations, insecurities, and emotions that affect your every action and relationship. Welcome to Upbuilding the Self.
Hi, everyone. This is Vipin, and I am here with Hari Prasada and Michael, two of my partners at Upbuild, for another episode of Upbuilding the Self. How are you guys?
Hey, Vipin.
Oh, good. Excited to be speaking about something that is very illuminating for me personally, and that we found in our work is quite illuminating for others.
I'm excited to be speaking about something that's illuminating for you as well, because I'm sure it will be even more illuminating for me. Let's jump right into it. Hari, you and Rasanath were trained as coaches by the great man, Dave Parke, who I've never met myself, but he had the Center for Contextual Coaching. And he's offered a bunch of frameworks in the training that you guys have done that have been instrumental in our coaching and in our lives. And we spoke about one in another podcast around safe problems versus quality problems. And it's inspired us to share more of those frameworks. There's another one we're going to talk about today that he called the rules for achieving an outcome. And I know you had mentioned how it's such a fascinating framework and it's such a helpful framework. And I am really excited to discuss that with both of you and share it with our audience as well.
Amazing.
So, what are the rules for achieving an outcome? What is this framework? Can you just describe it very simply?
Yeah, every one of us has a set of rules that underlie everything we do, literally everything we do. The crazy thing is that we're rarely conscious of that. We're operating out of principles, and we're governed by those principles, those rules, but we are rarely aware of what they are. So the idea behind the rules for achieving an outcome is, if you can get a sense of actually what are the rules that I'm operating out of in any given circumstance, I'm opening up my freedom to be able to really embrace them or to change them in a way that will better serve me and the people in my life. An example would be how I peel an apple. I have had different rules for this at different times in my life, where you have to hold your thumb on the apple and you have to maneuver the peeler in one way, or no, you have to do it quick, like all around, just rotating quickly. And there are different people that will tell you different ways to do it. We all have a different set of rules for when we approach peeling an apple. But this is happening in our relationships. This is happening in core habits. This is happening everywhere.
Okay, so you're saying rules govern every single thing that we do. Sometimes we're aware, often we're not aware of what those rules are. And the idea here is to bring awareness so that we can either embrace those rules or potentially choose other rules. And you gave this example of the apple. So let's break that example down. You're talking about different ways you can peel. And I'm thinking, well, that's just different processes. And as you grow older, you might try a different process. But what's the outcome? The outcome is that you just need a peeled apple.
Exactly.
Okay. And so when you say there are rules, you mean, okay, there are different ways of doing it. But how are you being governed by those rules here?
Yeah, I mean, you could take this further. There are people who will peel the apple with the garbage can right next to them or underneath them. There are people who will do it in the sink or who will do it on the counter, right? And we tend to approach it the same way. There's a pattern, and there's some reason for the pattern. And if we're asked, oftentimes we can give the reason, unless there are certain cases where we can't actually. Yeah, exactly. And that becomes even more revealing. But many times when we're asked, we figure out what the reason is on the spot. And it's like, oh, that's why I do that. Oh, now I understand what I'm doing. So we're walking around unconsciously doing things. And if we want to raise our level of consciousness, which is a chief goal at Upbuild, we have to wake up to what's behind what we're doing. We have to be conscious.
When you were talking about peeling over the sink or peeling over the garbage, the word that came to my mind is preferences. So we may have different preferences. And so is that what we're talking about here when we're talking about rules? It's just we have different preferences and being aware of those preferences?
I think we're also hoping for different outcomes, which we might not be so aware of. So for example, we might have a certain part of our process with the apple peeling that's actually meant to protect our thumbs from getting cut by the knife. Or because we want to eat the apple in a certain way 5 minutes from now when we're done peeling the apple. And so we actually carve around the core part of it in a little bit of a different way. So it's not just about preferences, because we're actually trying to get specific outcomes. And the way that we go about it is going to either allow us to get those outcomes, not allow us to get those outcomes in a more optimal way, in a less optimal way. And so there's actually a lot of nuance here that can be unpacked.
And we have underlying ideas of what needs to happen. It needs to be done in the most efficient way. So if I peel it holding my thumb and go across the entire apple versus like quickly just rotating the apple and going up and down, I'm thinking one of those has got to be more efficient than the other. Right? So there are many different reasons for why we do what we do.
And that shows, if you're one of those people, that you have an orientation towards efficiency, and that's actually what you're hoping for, as opposed to somebody else who might want to just peel the most beautiful apple that's ever been peeled, or to peel the skin without breaking the skin. And actually, that's more important than the efficiency.
Right. Do I make sure that there's not a tiny, tiny bit, a speck of peel on there, and it's like completely white? Or is it okay to just, let it be as it is? I did a good enough job. It's fine. Nobody's going to care.
And what's important about the distinction between those two things? Why does this matter?
Because I have all of these beliefs and all of these drivers that are running me. And it comes down to something as simple and mundane as peeling an apple. So again, extrapolate that. Imagine how this is affecting habits that are core to shaping me as a person and my relationships.
Yeah. And beyond that, if we think about how do I define my life, or what do I want out of life, the purpose that I have for being on the planet, if we extrapolate up from the apple to goals to life's purpose, I mean, a lot's at stake here when we're thinking about what are really the rules. I like to think of it as the rules that rule us. What are the rules that are ruling us here?
Let's break away from the apple example. Let's talk about a couple others. Michael, would love to hear, can you share an example from your life that this framework applies well to?
Yeah. One of the situations I'm currently bumping up against is an issue with a very close family member, where he and I are not on great speaking terms at the moment because of a whole host of things that have happened in the past. And as I'm thinking about trying to make the best of this relationship, or to improve this relationship and either get back on speaking terms or just figure out the pathway forward, what I'm seeing is that there are a lot of rules that I have around what's the right way to do this, or what is an acceptable way to do this, or what he needs to be doing on the other side of this in order for me to want to engage at all. So, for example, one of the things is I'm okay carrying the load in terms of the communication, meaning that I'm the one doing most of the reaching out. But if he ignores me for a couple of days, then I shouldn't invest any time. That's one of the rules that
has been governing me, but hasn't been so conscious until I've started to think about it in the context of this framework. And it's worth thinking about, like, is that actually a rule that I want to have in place that will govern how I interact in this relationship?
First of all, I appreciate you sharing that a lot and know it's weighing on you. And the question I have is, what has shifted as that rule you've gained greater awareness of it? So what is the impact, without even making a change yet to that rule, what shifted from you knowing that you have this underlying rule that's governing your interactions with him?
So first of all, this is all happening in real time, and actually started to happen before we were recording, and we just started talking about some of the examples that we might share during the podcast. So I hope you'll all bear with me as I process this right now. But the first thing which it's causing me to do right now is reestablish what is the outcome that I actually want in this situation. So and I think this is the case, what I want is a real relationship with this person in a meaningful way going forward. So if that's actually the outcome, does this rule that I have about shutting down when I'm not receiving reciprocation, does that serve that outcome? And what I'm seeing right now is not so much.
Wow. Yeah. So you're clear on what the outcome you want, which is a relationship, a strong relationship with this family member. And you've set up rules that may not be aligned with that outcome. And so you want to relook at those rules of engagement.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing is to also look at that rule that I had, which was unconscious, was there for a reason. It wasn't just random. And so I need to also understand what that reason was. So for example, in this example, what I think, it was there to protect me. It was there so that I don't pour a ton of heart and energy into this relationship and then feel disappointed or rejected on the other side. And so I need to honor that. I need to actually think about, maybe without shutting down, so without following that previously unconscious rule, what are some other ways which I can put up some boundaries or barriers, or just offer myself ways of thinking about it that would still give me that protection?
Yeah. What I'm getting from this is it's such a complex issue, and bringing more awareness to all sides of it so that you can take each step with a lot of intentionality, versus what often for many of us is just reacting to a certain trigger or a certain catalyst almost without our intelligence, just like what we feel in that moment, and maybe from the place of our egos.
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to say, is now I need to also see like how my ego is the one that probably was a big part in writing this rule, because we're talking about reciprocity here. But what's more visceral is like, this guy doesn't respect me. Screw him because he doesn't respect me. And the ego does not like to feel disrespected. And so if I see that it's coming from the ego, maybe I have a chance to step back and first of all say, is that really the case, that he doesn't respect me? To relook at that. And then also to see, is that what I really need? Is that what I need this guy to have this crazy amount of respect? Have I even earned that respect? Is that the thing here, or is it much different?
Hari, I would love to hear your take on this. As I'm listening to Michael, I'm thinking, isn't the ego always the one writing the rules?
Yeah. And unless we consciously shift to the real self, then the ego is the one always. And that's a whole big journey with a lot of work that's required. So yeah, the ego is in charge. And I was going to say, Michael, what you're bringing up is a great example of what Dave Parke would call complex equivalence. Complex equivalence means that A equals B. I've just equated, I've put the rules to mean that A equals B. So respect is from answering my text message within a day, let's say? Does A actually equal B? How do I know that respect means I will answer the message within a day? How do I know that there aren't other circumstances that are preventing that have nothing to do with respect? Right? There are so many different ways that you can slice this. But I have in my mind this complex equivalence or this rule that if I'm to be respected, it means that I'm going to get a message back within this time frame. And other people in our lives may have a different rule on that. We're bumping up against their rules for achieving an outcome.
Yeah, and we can look for counterexamples in order to help us. So as coaches, this is something we do with our clients. We can do this with our friends, or hopefully we can do this with ourselves. So we can look at, in that example, have I ever received a text from somebody 2 weeks later rather than within 24 hours, and that person did respect me? And if that's the case, and I think we all have had that happen to us at various times, then all of a sudden our logic starts to break down, or at least it's just not as solid as where it felt originally.
And a key feature here is that we're thinking that our rules are objective and we're holding people to them, which ties very much to your piece that was so well done, our unilateral contracts, where you talk about how we have these contracts that we've made people sign without their knowing. So we have these rules that are unwritten, often unspoken, often even unknown to us, what to speak of to others. And now we're holding people to them. And that's not very freeing for us or for each other. So I'm thinking that this is objective. This is just what any decent human being would do, damn it. I mean, can you imagine? And I start complaining to my friends, can you imagine this is what this person did to me? But these are my rules, and I'm not taking responsibility for that. That's the ego, is I relinquish responsibility and I put it on other people. Now, there may be things that we need to process. There may be things that affect us, and there may be some objectivity as well. But we're not operating from that place of really trying to understand what is objective here. The default is my subjective rules are automatically objective. And if you're not playing by my rules, it's a problem.
I was also thinking that my rules are likely to be different with different people. So in this example of the text messages, I know that there are many people who I'm not even aware of the duration of time between the message back to me. But when there's a heightened sensitivity in a relationship, there's also a story that I tell. So the story here is, this person is purposely, intentionally not replying right away, or making me sweat, or just not giving me the attention and respect I deserve. So much of it is actually, at least what I'm getting also, is so much of it is seeing the story that I'm telling here and questioning the story. There's the counter examples of there are other people, but I can imagine myself also countering that. Yeah, but this is a different situation. So those other examples are not so relevant. But then really looking at what is the story that I am making here, and what are the rules associated with this particular story.
And part of the story is the complex equivalence that Hari mentioned around, if this person doesn't respond within a certain amount of time, that means that there's disrespect, or that means that they don't appreciate me, or that means that they haven't listened to what I've shared with them in the past.
Okay, good. So there's rules for achieving an outcome. Then there's complex equivalence, which it sounds like equivalence, but what the complexity is that we're equating A with B. But the complexity is these are two disparate things that we often don't recognize that we've equated. So that's where complex comes in.
Well said.
That is part of the same framework, but it's sort of a sub. How would you think about this?
Yeah, exactly. it fits really nicely with the rules for achieving an outcome, because you see how this comes up regularly in our rules, is that I create this rule because of an unconscious belief, or as you were talking about the story, that A equals B.
Great. So can we talk about how we actually use this? So let's say in coaching first and then in our own lives. I mean, Michael gave a great example of in his life right now, how he's processing something with this framework in mind. Say you're coaching me. How can you actually use this to help me?
Let's talk about habits, because I think that'll be a great entry point.
I use this constantly in my coaching work. And I often give the example, there are really two things that come up super prominently amongst many of my clients over many years. And to your point, Michael, it's about habits, because habits really shape our consciousness and our character. So habits are very important. Having the right habits and making sure that we can sustain them so that they sustain us is crucial to our well-being, to our growth, and therefore to our coaching. So two habits that I often work with, and I work with them in myself also, so I have a good frame of reference for how I would look at it with my clients and how important they are. It's exercise and meditation. Exercise and meditation. And with exercise, I'm always reminded of one specific example of a founder who was telling me, look, I need to exercise in my life because I need to de-stress. It's really important to me in order to continue being my best and showing up at work the way I need to. Exercise is pivotal. Okay, so what's the outcome that you want with exercise? Well, I need to exercise every day for like 90 minutes. Okay, so 90 minutes is the outcome. Well, there's also a rule there.
Yeah, I was thinking, is that the rule?
It kind of goes both ways. So I was questioning, okay, you're a really, really busy person. You're running the entire company and you're giving everything to your work. And you want to exercise 90 minutes a day and also be a functioning human being. Is that really going to happen? And the idea that he had in mind was, well, if I don't, the belief behind this was, if I don't, it's just not substantial. I can't exercise for less than that because it won't feel like exercise. So you see, there's a complex equivalence also. Exercise means 90 minutes. And I was pushing him that I don't think this is going to be realistic. Why don't you set your goals smaller and surprise me? Why don't you, make me super happy that you exceed your goal rather than put yourself to such a high standard? And this ties to another concept of Dave Parke's that is really, really important and beneficial as well. Come back to, rather than being frustrated, trying to achieve an outcome that you're not really set up to successfully achieve. And he had pushed back a lot. I said, okay, go for it. Let's make this happen. 90 minutes a day. And he came back with his tail between his legs. He was like, oh, I couldn't do it. And I said, okay, so are you ready to shift the goal? No, I just got to be more determined. Okay, be more determined. Let's see what happens. Finally, a long time later, I got an email after actually we were no longer coaching. I finally see that it would have been helpful to reduce the habit. I was saying, and I say this to most of my clients, go embarrassingly small. Something that feels so not substantial, the opposite, that you're going to do it because it's so easy. It practically does itself. It's embarrassing. And let your ego feel the burn a little. It's okay. This is where I'm at, that I need to go embarrassingly small, at least to start, so that I know I'm set up for success and I will actually do it. I'll follow through. So he had said that actually works, that I wasn't exercising at all. And now I'm exercising and it's so helpful. So the rules are it has to be a certain way. And the other term that I wanted to bring in, which is so vital, is Dave Parke would talk about optimum/ideal versus required/acceptable. So we have in mind that it has to be the optimum/ideal. It has to be something so substantial. It has to be really, I was telling Michael earlier, like a sexy goal. Then I'll feel like really good about it. But that is often depriving me. And I can say this actually for everybody. We have habits and aspects of our lives that fit this. And it's really powerful when you start to uncover what those are and how to work on them. I could be doing the required/acceptable. I could be doing something that's moving the needle forward, but it feels beneath me, or it feels just like, well, if it's not everything, I'd rather do nothing. And oftentimes it's unconscious. It's just inertia. If I can't do everything, I don't have the motivation. But doing bite-sized atomic habits, as the book says, that is actually a very intelligent approach. It's rewriting the rules in a way that's more realistic for where I'm at and allows me to grow where I want to get to in my outcome.
I can attest, because Hari has coached me on this exact thing. I had mentioned that I want to have a meditation habit. I said 20 minutes a day, 5 days a week. And he said, I'm going to negotiate that 10 minutes a day, every single day, so that there's no brain cells lost in questioning, is today going to be my off day or not? Like, can I just let myself go? But moving it down to 10, and maybe this is embarrassing for some people. For me, 10 minutes was not embarrassing small. It was just half as much as 20 minutes. I think I was probably embarrassed to go any lower than 20 minutes with you because of how good you are with meditation. So there may have been some embarrassment there, but 10 minutes for me is not embarrassing small, but it was so helpful because it just made sitting down to do it so much less of a, oh my God, this is going to take so long, or I have to dedicate such an enormous amount of time. And usually I ended up doing 20 minutes, but having the bar lower was helpful.
Thank you for sharing that, Michael. I always tell clients, you can exceed the goal. That's great. Do it. As long as you don't burn yourself out because you've actually made it a different goal. That's not what we want to do. We want to keep the goal. And then anytime you're inspired to exceed it, fantastic. And if you end up exceeding it every single day, then you can bump up the goal, right? But consistency is the key. In shaping our consciousness and our character, the consistency of our habits is the key. And not every habit needs to be every single day, but the ones that are going to give us the highest leverage often are every single day. Like my own meditation practice, that is my life and soul. I wouldn't be me if I missed a day. I would not be me if I missed a day. That's how central it is, 100%. But I didn't start with the level of practice that I'm at now. I had to work my way up. And that is humbling, and it takes hard work and patience and determination, all the things the ego doesn't like. We want the results without the process.
It sounds like, particularly with habits, often, and maybe not just with habits, but often our rules for achieving an outcome, it's the idealized outcome and the optimal outcome. And so looking at that and reorienting towards something that, like you said, is more acceptable at a minimum. And then we can always exceed it, but not rigging the game from the start and feeling demotivated because I'm not able to get to that outcome. And then, well, I might as well not even just do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And also, I think a lot of this, to tie it back to the overall framework here, is about bringing what's unconscious conscious and being really clear about that. So in my example, what I was looking for was a consistent meditation practice that would allow me to drop into my deeper self. And so if that's the goal, then going from 20 minutes to 10 minutes still feels very consistent with the goal. And going from 5 days a week to 7 days a week feels very consistent with the goal. Hari, with your example and the founder, if his goal was to be able to show up as his best self at work and feel energized, and like, is 90 minutes really the thing that's going to get him to that goal? And then there can be some much more nuanced conversations around, like, what is the goal here? And what am I actually doing in order to reach that goal? As opposed to some vague notion of just like, I want to crush it at the gym on a daily basis and thinking that 90 minutes is what I need to be able to do that.
Yeah. This was also something we were speaking about earlier, Michael, that another rule is it has to be at the gym, or it has to be a class that's taught by somebody. And then it's like, yeah, I only have time for that basically once a month, but that's what exercise means to me. That's what it has to be. And this happens all the time in so many different ways. Well, can you do push-ups? Does that benefit you? Is that exercise? How does it work? Is it more doable? When we play with the rules, amazing things happen. When you first see the rules, amazing things happen. And then you have the freedom to be able to play with them and also to learn about yourself and understand, why am I wired like this? Why am I doing this? And we start to become conscious of our lives. I mean, like, why do I look at my phone first thing in the morning? Why do I look at emails first thing in the morning? Is that a rule that's there? Yes. What are the rules there? What is the outcome that I really want? What are rules that would better serve me? And I've had to do that. I mean, I've had phases where I was looking at my phone in bed every day when I woke up. And I'm like, is this really how I want to be? Are these rules serving me? And I changed the rules. Emails, do I have to constantly respond as soon as an email comes into my inbox? Or what rules do I have around when do I respond immediately, or when do I respond at all? Like, this is happening everywhere. Bringing attention is only going to benefit us.
This is so helpful. Earlier, when you both were talking about examples, I was thinking of an example in my own life. And as you were talking, I discovered a why that I do this. So the rule for an outcome, I was thinking about when I take a shower and how I have a certain pattern of washing my body. And it's been the same pattern since as long as I can remember, for 40 years, let's say. I always start at the top and work my way down. So when I had hair, I would shampoo and condition. Now I shampoo my beard. I work up from my face and I work my way down. And I was thinking, where did that come from and why do I do that? And all of a sudden, as you both were talking, I realized that, oh, it makes sense. If I started at the bottom and worked up, as I start cleaning my upper body and the dirt from there starts flowing down to the parts that have already been cleaned, it feels like counterproductive. So it makes sense to start at the top and go down. Now, I would ask you, so what do I do with that now? And it seems like one of the things you were saying earlier, Hari, is at least we can embrace. So even if we become aware of the rules, we understand why we're doing it. And I can say, okay, I like that rule. It's serving me, and I will continue to abide by that rule. And I don't have to think about it anymore. Is that what you would do? Something like that?
That's exactly what I was going to say. Yeah. Let's be no more the automatons that are walking around this world. Let's actually shed light on what we're doing, why we're doing it, and then change things to better serve us where it's important, where it's actually serving us just fine. No problem. We don't need to change it, but we can embrace it. And it's so funny because I have the same thing, and I bet many of our listeners have the same thing with how we wash ourselves. And this was illuminating to me as well. I have a certain routine for that. There are rules for how that needs to happen. I was telling Michael that when I brush my teeth, I have rules around how that needs to happen. And they've also evolved over time. And it's like now that I have, receding gums, I have to hold my toothbrush a certain way. That's fine. That serves me. I'll embrace that. But what I'm not usually aware of is that there are all these rules. And that alone is not serving me. The fact that I don't know, that I'm just kind of, as G.I. Gurdjieff, one of the people who brought us the work of the Enneagram that is so popular in our work and so important in our own personal development, he would say, we're just sleepwalking through life. It's got to stop. It's got to stop. So the rules for achieving an outcome is vital to help us stop sleepwalking.
This set of questions that I'm thinking about are, what are my rules for living a fulfilled life? What are my rules for being success? These questions seem almost so big. There's kind of rules upon rules upon rules, and I'm acting on the basis of all of these things, trying to achieve these, let's call them meta outcomes or mega outcomes. And how do I bring more awareness to the rules as I've set them up? Because sometimes with more awareness, I can actually, maybe I question some, maybe I embrace some, I question others, I discard some, but I might be, like you said, responding almost as an automaton to a set of rules that I've created that I'm even unaware of or that are no longer serving me.
In the discovery questions, which is a set of questions that I share with my clients after we've agreed to start an engagement, but before our first session. And one of the questions is, what measurable things do I need to happen in order for me to consider my life a life well lived? And, it's crazy, people's responses to these things, which are usually quite simple and quite grounded. And it's so helpful to see those things written down with pen and paper or on the computer. And then, and this is a really confronting exercise. It's confronting for myself when I try to do it. And it's confronting for other people as well when I'm trying to engage them to look a little deeper of like, am I doing now? Are the ways that I'm conducting my life and the kind of more medium-term goals that I'm going after, are those actually aligned with those longer-term things that I say that I want?
This reminds me also of, well, okay, there are different time horizons, so I'll get to that at some point, but right now, this is what I need to be doing. And it reminds me of Clay Christensen's work, where he wrote a book using all of his theories. He's famous for all his theories on disruptive innovation. He was a professor at Harvard Business School, and he wrote this book, How Will You Measure Your Life? And one of the stories that he tells is, if he looks at his graduating class, they would have all had these goals of the outcomes they were wanting were to have a very strong family, to have good relationships, to have a solid career. And he describes it in the opposite way. He was going back to a reunion, and when he was talking to his classmates, he realized that some of them had broken marriages, some of them weren't speaking to their children, some of them had actually ended up in prison for things that had happened in their business, fraud that had been committed. And he went back and said, if you met all of these folks at graduation, they talked about what are the outcomes that I'm hoping for over the next 25 years, no one would have been aiming for any of those outcomes. Obviously, that seems sort of obvious in retrospect. And yet, the strategies that they deployed were not actually consistent with the outcomes that they wanted. They were consistent with the outcomes that they got. And so this kind of goes to what you're saying. Well, yes, I want those other things, but I've set up a rule that this is what I need to be doing now, today, to achieve a certain level of success so that I can have, and actually I have these other outcomes that I want, but the rules I've set up are not in alignment with those outcomes. The rules are set up for a different set of outcomes. For example, I have to work 80 hours, 90 hours, 100 hours a week right now while my kids are small, because this is the prime of my career and I need to do that. Even if I've lost relationship with my kids, that's sort of a byproduct of what I need to do. And yet that's not actually consistent with the overall goal that I'm aiming for.
I really appreciate that.
For people who are listening and this framework is new to them, but they want to use it to bring more consciousness to their choices, their decisions, their rules, what one tip would you offer to start using this framework?
To me, it's what are my rules in each situation? Start with one thing, then go to another thing, then another thing, and see how pervasive these are and how there's actually nothing that exists in our lives without some rules. And to discover that is so profound. And then we have a lever to work with it. Okay, so how is this serving me? Evaluate. And this can be large or small, right? This can be brushing my teeth or how I relate to the opposite sex. I mean, it can be anything. I was thinking about an example of myself where, and I share about this in one of our workshops, something that makes me feel very, very humiliated is I realized that in a relationship with a person that I thought I was going to marry many years ago before I became a monk, I thought that to be in a good, healthy relationship meant that we had to worship each other. And I thought that I was doing a good job of worshiping the other person, but my rule for receiving the worship was not being met, that I was not put on a pedestal. I was not seen in a certain light. And, not everything revolved around me. I mean, this is pure ego stuff, right? This is the epitome of ego. And I realized, oh, my rules for relationship were all wrong. They were all wrong because they were all egoic and they weren't serving myself, the real self. They weren't serving the other person. They weren't benefiting healthy relationship. And so I had to reevaluate. What are my rules for relationship? And this has been a process over many, many years. I'm still discovering my rules in relationship. Thankfully, they're not that anymore. That's a big victory. And it took time to actually discover that that was the rule because I wasn't going to tell you up front. I wasn't even going to admit to myself up front that that's what's going on. The ego has too much pride to say that I want worship. That feels so like, oh, that's disgusting, you arrogant person. No. I'm above that. But that's what I wanted. And it took time again to uncover that that was the rule and to be able to admit that to myself and to start to shift things to rules that will actually be aligned with who I am deep down. So ask these questions. What are my rules in small and in large ways? And evaluate, how are they serving you? And what would you like to do differently? How would you like to rewrite those rules in the places where they're not serving you so well?
Great. What are my rules in big and little situations? How are they serving me? And what would I like to change if I need to?
And then just the last thing on that is do it. So it's not just how would I change it? Because that's an intellectual exercise, which many of us are satisfied to remain at the level of. And what we need to do is actually put our money where our mouth is. And we need help with that. We need accountability. We need to be so serious and so committed to ourselves and to have people in our lives who are willing to hold our feet to the fire on our behalf.
Yeah. Don't just think about it. Do it.
Yeah. That's where you'll get maximum gain. Of course, seeing is already so powerful. Just to see these things, that is amazing. That's a real strong emphasis. But then if you're content to see and not do, then there's the disconnect.
And building off of what Hari just shared is looking for the complex equivalences that might be present within those rules. So Hari, in your example, you shared not only this rule of if I'm in a relationship, both people have to worship one another, but also there's a complex equivalent of what does she need to do in order to satisfy this idea that she is worshiping me? And so we want to look for the rules that we have that might not be so conscious, and then also look for the meanings that we're making about things in order to have those rules be satisfied.
That's great. Yeah. How will I know that I'm being appreciated enough? Right? How will I know? That's a different set of rules, and there are complex equivalences there. Fantastic.
Wonderful. So just to summarize a few points, I think that have been really hammered home here, but for my own benefit and hopefully for others as well. When we talk about the rules for achieving an outcome, one, that there are an unwritten and often unconscious rules to every single thing that we do. Uncovering those rules gives us the power to actually reshape them. The empowerment comes from seeing the rules that I've chosen and either embracing them, as you said, Hari Prasad, with full ownership, or then choosing new rules that are actually more beneficial for me. It starts with being conscious of what those rules are, seeing how they're serving me, and then choosing what the rules should be, and then doing it. Thank you both so much for this conversation. I am leaving with more consciousness of the rules that I need to pay attention to, and I'm excited to see what impact this has on me, bringing this really to the forefront of my mind right now.
Peeling an apple will never be the same.
Yes, indeed.
Neither will my shower. Now, every time I go in the shower, I'll think, yeah, I know why I'm doing it this way.
I'm going to start from the bottom and see what happens.
Put your rules to the test.
I'm really worried about you.
Thank you, guys. This was wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Upbuilding the Self. Upbuild is a leadership development company that offers workshops, coaching, and other services to help you on the path towards being your best self, free from the shackles of the ego. To learn more about our work, visit our website, upbuild.com, and sign up for our newsletter to gain access to podcasts, reflections, and upcoming events. If you enjoyed this episode, please go to iTunes to leave us a review so that others can find and benefit from the podcast. We look forward to being with you again next time.